The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, hello, everyone. My name is Brian Berger. Thanks for joining us for this webinar on the human side of cybersecurity. We've got two distinguished panelists that are going to be joining us today. I'm happy to be moderating this conversation on the human side of cybersecurity. First up, we've got Dr. Maria Beda. She's a lecturer in psychology at Queen Mary University in London, an RICS fellow in cybercrime, and an external behavior scientist at Awerago. She received her PhD from Pantheon University in Athens, UK in 2013. Her research focuses on the human aspects of cybercrime and cybersecurity, as well as the effectiveness of cybersecurity awareness campaigns and their impact in changing online behavior. She has collaborated with governments and international organizations to assess national level cybersecurity capacity. Has a background in cyber psychology, and she's a member of the British Psychological Society and the National Counseling Society. Also, we've got Suzanne Gorman, Vice President, Information Security and Risk Management Evangelist at Global Learning Systems. Suzanne is a frequent blogger, podcaster, and speaker on cybersecurity. She's well known for designing and implementing comprehensive information security programs with an emphasis on security awareness training. She holds both CISSP and CRISC certifications. Suzanne has spent most of her 35-plus year career on Wall Street, leading large information security teams. She's an active contributor on numerous government councils and advisory committees. She worked on government initiatives at both state and federal levels. She served as the chairperson of the Financial Services Information Sharing Analysis Center and the ISAC Council. She has testified before Congress on cybersecurity for the homeland, and she has been honored with the Women of Vision Award. She's been named one of the top 25 most influential women in the information security industry. Network World also named Suzanne one of the 50 most powerful people in networking. In 2022, Suzanne was recognized as one of the top women leaders in Tampa Bay. How's that for two resumes for you right there? Suzanne, Dr. Beda, thank you for joining us on this webinar. How are you guys doing today?
It's a pleasure.
Well,
it should be a fun webinar with us.
It will be fun. You guys are so accomplished and distinguished, and I think our audience is looking forward to your insight. So let's get right into this. Suzanne, I'll start with you. How do people perceive cyber risk and their personal vulnerability?
You know, Brian, I think what we're going to do is we're going to change this around just a little bit. I'm going to let Maria answer the more technical questions.
Okay.
I'm sorry, and we should have briefed you on this. And then I'm going to talk about how I've seen it impact the organizations that I've worked with throughout the years. Sound cool?
Yes.
Go ahead, Maria, off to you.
Yes, so this way we can actually bring both kind of the academic theoretical perspective, but also the practitioner's perspective, and have a kind of a more complete approach, I would say. Yes, it's all about risk perception, isn't it? And it's I think it's a very good question, because the way we perceive risk will definitely impact the way we react and respond to a threat, a potential risk. But also how we will respond to it and how do we perceive risk. So there are different factors that will actually influence the way we perceive risk. First of all, am I familiar with that risk? People might be talking to me about ransomware attacks. Do I know what that means? Have I heard any examples of these attacks? What do they mean? I don't know. How are they initiated? What is the impact? So it all goes back to my familiarity and knowledge of a potential threat, but also, do I have any control on that threat? For example, if, and we hear a lot of advice in cybersecurity on users and of course employees on, I don't know, update your passwords, use a VPN. Do I have the skills and knowledge to actually do this? So can I actually follow some specific advice in order to control the potential risk and threat? So all these factors will actually define my reaction, whether that trigger will take place that will motivate me to actually respond to risk with my behavior. So I would say these are the main kind of factors, but also, is potentially a threat or a risk targeting me specifically? Could I be the target, or do I perceive risk as something random that could happen to anyone? That again can influence the way we react, or whether we will react in the first place. And of course, the way, as I said, we perceive risk will actually define how we respond to it. And I think I will let Suzanne come into that before I talk about the potential impact of the way we perceive risk and the emotional kind of response to that.
So, right, when you talk about risk and then you're dealing with the human element, right, we have to hope that as we run security awareness training programs, that we're getting through to them to make them, I think so many people think, well, it's never going to happen to me, right? And I'm never going to be clicking on that link because I'm too smart. I might be an executive and I might think that I'm smarter than most of the employees out there. But the fact of the matter is that, when we get these, say, phishing emails, right? Let's just take email as the threat, surface. You think about that, right? Email is the biggest and most frequently used application on the planet. And we use it every day, and sometimes we get lackadaisical with it. So when we see these emails coming in, and it could look like it's coming from a friend or a boss or somebody else, or it seems like it's breaking news, that we become very curious and we click. So that we have to try and always get through to the employees and also the people that are not in an organization, like say my parents. I was just with them this weekend, and my dad fell victim to somebody that called him up and said that his credit card had expired, and he didn't verify who it was, just randomly gave his credit card information. And then all of a sudden he was notified that all this fraudulent activity was going on. So I think that's a big thing that we have to think about, Maria, as we go forward. It's not just in the workplace, it's so much in our home lives.
Absolutely.
And with the seniors, they're not being educated. And what do we do about that? So I'm going to give it back to you now.
Yes, and actually about the seniors and the elderly, they are identified as really the #1 target, especially during the pandemic. We actually forced the elderly to become, I don't know, to use online services with zero background, zero knowledge. They had to do online banking, online shopping, because they couldn't go out. So with the lockdown, so they had to actually use these services without any knowledge or prior experience. So of course they fell victims for all types of scams. So yeah, that's a group that we really need to consider of how we can enhance their awareness and knowledge and skills, because as you said, simple things, they call them up, asking them for information, and the trust issue is there. And you need, and actually you want to update your details, your credit card details, you want to offer that information. So, and basically during the pandemic, people wanted to communicate with others. So that made things quite easy.
Right.
For those with malicious intentions.
You know, the other group that really fell victim also were the children, right? Children were in classrooms. Now all of a sudden they're at home and they're on computers and they're doing collaboration. And, you know, there was so many problems with children during the pandemic as well. So we can't forget about that little group either. Well, that's a big group, but, you know, we can't forget about the little ones and how do we educate them and their teachers as well.
Yeah, that was a huge challenge. I was actually teaching online the last 2 years, and apart from the technical difficulties and the lack of communication often, so we saw that universities even and schools were not prepared, meaning they had no processes in place. Teachers were not trained to actually use some of these applications, and we've had several cases of, for example, Zoom bombing attacks and that kind of thing. So yeah, I think it became very clear that even sectors that wouldn't think about cybersecurity, such as the education sector, they are now a target. So they have to really worry about all these things as well.
Right.
Dr. Beta, does an emotional response to risk make cybersecurity a greater challenge?
Yes, and I actually started by mentioning the different factors that can influence how we perceive risk. But all these factors can lead to fear, especially if I sense that a threat is quite severe, but also I lack the skills or I cannot control that threat. Then emotions arise, emotions of fear, of dread, of actually feeling helpless. And I think that is really the key aspect that can lead to irrational behavior. We call it the learned helplessness. And basically that describes the behavior of someone who thinks that they don't have the knowledge and skills to follow specific advice. For example, update your password or build a strong password. I don't know how to build a strong password. So, for example, the learned helplessness sense leads me into do nothing. And basically, I go into a cycle of being a victim of a cyber attack, do nothing because I think everyone will become a victim of a cyber attack. I also don't have the skills, and I consider cybersecurity as something very difficult and challenging. So I put no effort, no motivation there. And that leads to another cyber attack. So I become a victim again. And actually, there's a lot of research showing that victims, actually those who became 2 or 3 times victimized, they didn't change their behavior. So that means we don't learn necessarily from experience or from possible mistakes. And going back to psychology and the theory of that, we actually fall victims out of that sense of learned helplessness. And that is a bad feeling to have, being helpless and basically just accepting what comes online, which is really not what we want. And users and individuals have the ability to actually control some part of of kind of the risky behavior and risks online. So yeah, thinking about how to avoid that is what basically we do, or what I do in my everyday practice. So emotions can actually lead to irrational behavior in the long term. And if it was in the short term, fine, things can change. But the thing is that how we perceive risk and the emotion that that perception leads in can impact our long-term behavior, and that is not a very good outcome.
Suzanne, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, you know, she's absolutely spot on, and we see this so many times, not in the workforce as well, right? Because I think that there's so many organizations that don't train properly. So that's certainly one aspect of it, which, you know, shame on them, but also shame on the individuals that, you know, if it says, you know, make a strong password, everyone knows how to Google things, right? So why not just go out there and try and educate yourself on, you know, on how to create a passphrase or a password. And, you know, and back to those people that are not working in the workforce, they have no ability to you know, gain this information if it, you know, if they're not out there actively looking for it. You know, I don't know if you have, in the United States, we have AARP, and it's for citizens, and they actually have some hints and tips that they give to the senior citizens on different cybersecurity aspects. And to me, hats off to them. I think that they're doing an awesome job. Now, if we can get everybody to read that and follow some of these messages,
yes,
that would be awesome. But you know, that human nature, right, Maria? It's hard to change those cycles, and I think it also happens that they get embarrassed, right? Like, my father didn't tell me what he did. My mother told me what my father did, and she said, and don't discuss it with him. He's very embarrassed. So then you have that factor, right? So yeah, let's do nothing and hope for the best, right? So
yeah, absolutely. And if we take it at, I don't know, at the organizational level, employees don't necessarily report something that happened. It might take months until IT spots something because no one reported it. But also at the national level, we see, and it's obvious that we don't have the true numbers of cybercrime. We know that, and we know that organizations are not necessarily reporting different types of attacks. So why is that? Because everyone is afraid at an individual level, as you said. I'm embarrassed. At an organizational level, my reputation will be very embarrassed and harmed. So yeah, there is still that kind of emotional load of victimization. And I would say there is an emotional load of the word cybersecurity and, of course, cybercrime. And I think it all starts from there, changing how we perceive the world of cybersecurity might actually lead us to better behaviors. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it does. It absolutely does. But you know what? Here's something interesting. When I worked for one of the big financial firms on Wall Street, we had an employee, and he worked within one of the data centers, and he was a little odd, you know, and he would come out with these strange things and say to employees or email employees, and you know, nobody really said anything. You know, so that goes back to that, you know, see something. Anyway, finally somebody reported this email that they had received. It was a little wacky, and I had said to the legal team, I think we should really go in there and do a forensic analysis and see what's going on in this data center. They said, oh, no, we don't really need to do that. Anyway, the person ends up, they get rid of him, let him go. And then they start receiving emails again from him. And it would be things that were said in that data center that were since he had left. So somebody had finally mentioned it after a few months, and we did finally go in there and we did a forensic analysis. And what we found is that he had a keyboard capture program loaded on every device there. So everybody that was there texting back and forth or entering the user ID and passwords, the file would fill up and then it would be sent to him. So even as something as innocuous as somebody acting like out of character, it should be looked at, I believe.
Yeah, and it should be spotted, right, from other employees or even the manager, someone, because obviously there are always signs, and we can spot insiders. So, yeah, totally agree.
So along those lines, Dr. Beta, what are effective methods to encourage people to better protect themselves from cyber harm?
So yeah, I don't know if we should start about defining what cyber harm can be. It can be so many things, starting from reputational harm, which we also mentioned, emotional, psychological, right? We talked about victims, but also financial, which most of industries worried about, and of course nations. But I think when it comes to taking measures to protect yourself as an individual, as a government, as an organization overall, it's not enough just complying with what is required, because if we take the organizational level first, we see a lot of companies focusing on providing awareness programs and training once a year just to tick the box and actually accomplish compliance because they have to, without necessarily looking at, okay, what is the effectiveness of that program? What does it mean for my employees? Is it necessarily relevant? Going into, you know, the details that will actually be very, very meaningful and important when it comes to the actual behavior and the outcome of this training. Because in order to protect yourself as an individual, an employee, or a country, you need to take specific measures. And that is not just offering simple knowledge or simple advice to your people or to yourself. Knowledge training has to link with behavior. And how do we do that? We have to be aware of potential risks and make the link. Okay, I'm aware of that potential risk and that I could be victimized. What do I need to do, or what do I need to avoid because in order to avoid that risk? And I think it's all about making that link and also kind of having the mindset of cybersecurity and staying safe online in everyday life. It's not just my work environment that I have to worry about. It's also my my everyday life, my relationships, my posts on social media. Basically, every aspect of our social life can be impacted, and basically that can lead to us being harmed. And so many things fall into this, as I said, how we perceive potential risks or whether we are aware of these risks. But as an individual or as an organization, I would make I would take the measures not just to provide simple advice and knowledge. It has to go deeper than that. And let's not forget that, okay, we need to be aware and actually consider compliance, but it's more than that. You need to have processes in place. You need to let employees aware of who has the responsibility of specific things. If there is a ransomware attack, who acts on what and when, that they need to report incidents. So there are many things that you can actually do to prevent being harmed and victimized online at all levels, I would say. So Suzanne, back to you.
No, I definitely agree. And you know, I said this before, Brian, right? Security awareness is a journey and there's no destination. So within the workforce, you can't do that one and done training module. And most of them are that long one that, you know, most people just zone out on anyway. So to me, I think that like educating and awareness across the company, whether it's who to report things to, has to be an ongoing basis. So to me, I think that security awareness, should be every month. You know, when they say, oh, cybersecurity is, you know, October. Well, no, I'm sorry. It should be like an ongoing thing. If you want to check the box that you want to give that major, you know, that big module, you know, to your employees, but then make sure that you follow up and you do simulated phishing attacks and you do remedial training and you do targeted training for some of your higher risk areas, like your developers, right? Developers write code. They're not trained on how to develop secure code. So we have to look at that, make sure that we train our executives, and always make sure that, you know, during the training process, if you see something, say something, they have to know who to say it to, right?
Yeah.
So I think that that's really, you know, important. And the emotional aspect on a personal level, like, you know, you said about social media. Social media is, I mean, we just can't get away from it. And everybody's comments, I mean, look at what just went on this weekend with Roe versus Wade. I mean, everyone's got their own opinions on it. And, you know, you can get completely overwhelmed with so much of this, but then you can easily become prey to somebody that might want to target in on you about what your thoughts are on social media. So I think we have to be very careful in all aspects of our lives.
I want to remind our audience that in about 10, 15 minutes, we're going to get to your questions. So if you have questions for Suzanne or Dr. Beta, drop them into the questions tab, and we will get to those in just a little bit. Dr. Beta, what are the common traits and motivations for cyber criminals? I know we've discussed that a little bit here so far, but what are some of the common traits that exist?
Yes, and trust me, there is a lot of research behind this, starting from the 60s, not necessarily for cyber criminals, but criminals overall. So there are specific personality traits linked to criminal behavior. Let's start with criminal behavior, such as psychoticism. You might have heard of the psychotic killer. When we talk about someone who is cold, antisocial, aggressive, but also extroversion has been linked to criminal behavior, or tendency towards criminal behavior, if I should say it right. And by extroversion, we mean someone who is seeking sensation outside in the external environment. And also neuroticism is one of the personality traits that has been linked to criminal behavior, meaning someone who is unstable, who might have anxiety, depression. So all these aspects might kind of shape a personality who is kind of prone to becoming a criminal. Now, when it comes to cybercrime, there isn't enough research around, but some of the findings indicate that there are similarities between the two, online and offline crime. And when it comes to personality, we see similarities in terms of neuroticism or psychoticism, or, for example, narcissism. We see people who have that kind sense of superiority, being the leaders of organized criminal groups online, for example. Or we talk about Machiavellianism, and again, that trait shows and indicates a personality that feels superior and is actually very good at manipulating others. So again, that indicates someone who can be a very successful cyber criminal. But I think when it comes to the difference between online and offline crime, we see that introverts are actually those that would actually commit online crime. And that might relate to some of your experiences and yours, Suzanne, because we know that those with technical skills, they tend to spend a lot of time alone. They are not very necessarily good at socializing with others. So this is really something that is different in terms of offline and, you know, the traditional kind of criminal behavior. But when it comes to overall, if I had to kind of build the profile of someone who commits cybercrime, I would say definitely technical skills, at least basic technical skills, being an introvert. And in terms of their motivation, it's not necessarily always economic or financial. It could be anything like just enjoying manipulating others, or enjoying, for example, hacking video games and starting from there. So this kind of shapes very, very briefly, if I could kind of describe the profile of a cyber criminal nowadays.
It's interesting because I think back, oh my goodness, this was probably late 90s, early 2000, and we had an employee that was working on the firewalls, right, for a major organization, and he went to lunch and he never came back. And then we found what he did was he changed the firewall rules to any. So anything can go in, anything can go out. It was just amazing that the bad guys didn't find it and there was no damage done during that time. We never heard from him again. I don't know where he went, what his motivation was, but you know, he was an introvert. He was very quiet. To me, I thought he was, you know, just a quiet, quiet young man, and boom, look at that happen. So that could have been disastrous for us, right?
Oh yeah.
So you've talked about, the common traits of criminals. How do you develop trust with people and their online interactions?
Mm-hmm. I can start, Suzanne, with the answer. This, and actually, I would flip that, not how, but why. Online, we tend to trust more than offline. So I would say we trust people blindly. So we have examples of people sharing their credit card as a photo on social media. Oh, I got my new credit card, and just all the details are there. Or sharing the fact that they will be on holiday this weekend somewhere abroad. Or and honestly, we have so many examples of romance scams, of people actually trusting someone, sending them money so that they can visit them. And again, this is all about kind of manipulating human nature, and the fact that we have kind of a sense of online disinhibition. This is the kind of psychology theory behind that. But the fact that we don't necessarily see others online, so the internet can actually allow you to build your own persona. You can be invisible, you can be anonymous, and you can actually act online in different time zones, so asynchronous. All these can actually allow us to not only develop our own persona, the way and basically our persona can be completely different to what we actually look like or behave offline, but that can lead to others trusting us as well blindly, not just because I might be very good at manipulating others online, but just because human nature and human behavior tends to be very different online. And that trust element is actually one of the factors that can lead to serious victimizations. As I mentioned, online romance scams has been a huge hit for many people. So
yeah, I think people become more courageous, I think, when they're online. And you could be so timid and shy. So let's talk about romance scams just for a second, right? So you could be so timid and shy, and then you go into one of these groups and you find somebody, and how many times do we see it on the news? We read about it that they've been swindled out of like their life savings. So and these people take on different identities as well. So it's very scary. I don't really know how anybody And these romance scams began, and then the money started going out, and it's unbelievable.
And
the
things just
manipulation
became much easier, right, for criminals, because everyone was online. So building a relationship online is a natural thing nowadays. So
right. Yeah, to me, it's so bizarre that people can do this, but it happens all of the time. You know, with children and adults, right? They're looking for companionship, and it was a very lonely time for all of us with COVID.
I don't want to turn this into a commercial plug, but if you have Netflix and you've seen the movie The Tinder Swindler, it's exactly
yes,
and it's based on a true story. And the gentleman who's at the core of the story is still walking around free today, and could be doing this to other people. So if you see that on Netflix, you understand more what Dr. Beta and what Suzanne are talking about. This is real life, and it does happen. And that documentary does a really good job of kind of outlining the phases of how it could happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Very good example. Yeah. And yes, this guy could be easily a Machiavellian leader. So he's very good at manipulating others. So yeah, very good example.
Dr. Beta, the current landscape and the impact of ransomware attacks, can you discuss that a little bit?
Yeah, so we hear about ransomware attacks the last couple of years more and more. And of course, this is, I think, the most prevalent type of attack nowadays. And ransomware attacks, of course, are initiated by, again, a phishing email, could actually open the door for such an attack to evolve. But what can the impact be? Because again, if we turn back to how we perceive risk, for example, let's take SMEs. We didn't touch upon SMEs at all, small and medium enterprises. They don't expect they could be really the target of a ransomware attack. They think they don't have enough resources, that enough kind of financial gain that attackers might target, but they forget that what they hold is data, and cybercriminals are interested in that as well. And of course, ransomware attacks have been growing, and initially they actually started targeting large organizations, even governments. Nowadays, we see SMEs becoming their target, and that's quite interesting. And basically, if you think about it, why is that? Well, very simple. They're the really weakest link. They most of the times have no skills. They have no processes in place. They're not even aware of how ransomware attacks actually work, or how to prevent them. But most importantly, when the time comes, do you pay a ransom or not? That challenge can be devastating for them, because paying doesn't mean that they will get their data back or their business running. Because most of the cases, even for large organizations, after a ransomware attack, your business might have to hold and kind of stop production, for example, for days or weeks. If you're an SME, you can't really afford that. So I think cybercriminals are actually this is really the aspect they take advantage of. An SME has to keep their production going and their business going, so they will actually pay ransom, even if it is a smaller amount than what they would actually ask from a business that is quite large. So I would say that ransomware attacks are quite prevalent, and we see them at all levels at this point. Large organizations, SMEs, government departments. Now, what happens next is what I'm actually interested in at the moment. Do you pay, and under which really circumstances and conditions? Do you even report that attack? And what does that mean? Who needs to take that decision? Because I was mentioning earlier that in many companies don't have that kind of process, internal kind of communication strategies, allocation of who is responsible for what. So when that happens and you need to take a decision, emotions come in, panic, again, can influence your decision making. And I know I'm bringing a lot of psychology in, but even in the occasion of ransomware attack, how and with who you will make a decision of how to proceed is really important, and it will define how this will evolve. So yeah, Suzanne, back to you.
Well, and it's so true. I think many of the small and medium enterprises, the SMEs as you call them, they are targets. And to me, I have to tell you, I worked for a company, it was a publicly traded company, but not a very well-known name. So they always thought that they would never be a target, because even though when they were in the Fortune 500, because they didn't have a familiar name, but everyone is vulnerable. The problem, I think, and you're right, is that with the smaller and medium businesses, they don't have procedures in place. They don't know who to report to. Are they, and how quickly, can they do it? Are they going to pay? It's very interesting, but ransomware is very successful, right? Because it relies on that human element, right? Mm-hmm. And humans are fundamentally flawed, right? If we think about it that way. But yeah, it goes all back to that training, but it's just more than training them once a year, and it's on every aspect of it. It's so how do you respond to an incident? Do you have business continuity plans in place? Things like that. So yes, I totally agree, and it is a lot of psychology that has to go into it that works with these phishing emails and the ransomware attacks.
Yeah, and thinking that such an attack can be prevented, right?
Right.
Don't click on that link.
Right.
Don't open the door.
Right. So, stop being so curious.
At some level you can prevent it.
Right.
Dr. Beta, how was the public affected by the Wannacry attack in 2017?
Yeah, so this was one of the biggest attacks, right? The first big attacks of this type. And I think so many countries were affected and different sectors were affected. So again, that emotion of helplessness and lack of control at all levels, we hadn't seen that type of attack before. We didn't know what to do. People didn't know how to react and gain control of the data that were encrypted, right? And we're talking about an international level attack. And I think that one of the most kind of prevalent angle and that sense of lack of control, especially in the UK, was when that attack hit NHS, the healthcare sector, the national healthcare sector. So that meant that, for example, operations were cancelled. We had ambulances being diverted to elsewhere. We had a situation of panic, and no one knew how to actually react to it. And the most interesting aspect in terms of how, if we take it on the governmental level, the government tried to kind of like calm down that panic that was being caused by saying that, for example, it wasn't something that we could have done, we couldn't have prepared for it. But basically they were trying to calm down the audience by communicating what happened, and the fact that it was an international attack. It was not really targeting the UK. And going back to the initial factors I was mentioning of how we perceive risk, the fact that they were communicating this was not a targeted attack targeting the UK specifically, kind of narrowed down that sense of lack control, because it wasn't just in the UK, it was everywhere. So no one could really do something. So it's not just us. I think that overall approach, I'm not sure if it was successful enough, but overall the audience, especially in the UK, felt really helpless, and that kind of sense of panic prevailed. Especially because it hit the health sector. No one was expecting really NHS to be hit by ransomware attack. So I think it's not just the type of the attack, but the target can actually define how we react to such an attack. Is it just a random target? Is it really a national level, significance target? So all these factors can actually influence how the public will react to such an attack.
Right, and this, I mean, you figure it hit 150 countries, right?
Yes, yes.
That's, I think they were the numbers, right? And then it was also 4 billion in losses, and the numbers were just staggering, and and how many people gave into it because it was global, right? it was a big problem. Yep. I think it was a big wake-up call for everyone, around the globe.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think it was a wake-up call, and I mentioned the health sector because I think it was one of the first examples where we identified, okay, a cyber attack can actually lead to loss of life.
That's right.
Which that connection hadn't been made before. But, targeting the health sector can easily lead to that. So.
Couple more minutes before we get to questions from our audience. Again, if you've got questions for Dr. Beta or Suzanne, drop them into the question box and we will get to those in just a few minutes. Dr. Beta, what can business leaders do to reduce the risk of psychological and social harm from cyber threats?
Yes, so we touched upon different types of harms, and we touched upon how a successful awareness program can actually take place. But when it comes to business leaders, I think it's all about considering not just ticking the box around compliance, but also building a cybersecurity culture within the organization where there is trust. Employees feel free to report incidents. There's no blaming or shaming, because even if someone actually reports an incident, we have cases where managers were had really a punishing behavior towards the employee that actually reported because they were actually treated as they made, as really the weak kind of employee within the organization. So building a culture of trust and support, I think, is quite important if you want to not just have an awareness program, but have employees that actually prevent risk in the future. But also make sure that it's not a one-off approach. As a business leader, you can actually initiate exercises, have leaflets around, arrange seminars, webinars, and provide continuously support to employees. Because as I mentioned earlier, we expected from teachers to know how to teach online, use different applications and technology. And we might expect the same from employees when they had to work remotely, for example. We might have expected them to use a VPN or update the Wi-Fi password and so on, without necessarily providing them guidance or support on that. So there are things that business leaders need to really take care of instead of expecting that to happen magically with a training program. It's all about, for me, it's all about having that culture as a whole at the organizational level.
And I'm glad that you said that, Maria, because it's so true. Whenever I've kicked off an awareness program, I've always done it from the top down. So I always had the CEO endorse it. So if the CEO or the board of directors is behind it, you're going to be much more successful. The other thing is that I always found the biggest problem was with the middle management, right? The guys right under the C level, right? They didn't have time to do any of this security awareness stuff. And they would be the worst victim, right? They would be the worst, in the organization because they would be clicking on every single link. They didn't want to take training. But if it came from the top, and I did it either with a letter from the CEO endorsing the program, saying that this is a change in the culture of what we're going to be doing at X organization, and it's everyone's responsibility to take time to do this. You could spell out how frequently the training will be, or you could put the CEO in front of a green screen and have them talk to the audience and put that in your opening training module. But that's how I always felt that, if it had that buy-in and direction from the top and not from the security team, you had that mindset that it became part of the corporate culture, and it was okay to report, incidents. And I know way back, I would see, once I had that endorsement, I had more calls coming into a cybersecurity hotline, and less machines that had to be rebuilt because of being infected at that time with computer viruses. So I could show the metrics. So there's easy metrics that you can find and use those as ammunition to keep your budget intact, to keep your security awareness program going. Because now that we're getting into a recession, what's the first thing that organizations might cut? Is that cybersecurity budget. So we need people to be smart and use those metrics to be effective when they speak to their executive team to keep that funding in place.
Yeah, and understanding that by doing that, you can actually save money because you will prevent an attack that will require you, I don't know, thousands of dollars or pounds in Bitcoin. So you will save money in the end.
But and you always have to love the logic when they say, well, we've never been hit with a cyber attack yet. Well, you only need to be hit with one ransomware attack, right? And game over. So let's be smart and do the right thing for the organization.
Yeah, absolutely.
Dr. Beta, what are the risks and rewards of AI in regard to cybersecurity?
Yes, so we're going into really the kind of AI environment quickly, really fast. So we're using artificial intelligence, we're using smart devices, IoT devices in our everyday life, and we will more and more in the following years. But as you said, there are rewards on that, and of course, artificial intelligence can work in our favor. And if we take it to the cybersecurity kind of environment, it can help us prevent phishing attacks and fight against cybercrime, for example, or even kind of help us scan malware, faster, automated process. But also artificial intelligence is already being used in, not in our favor, but by criminals. So of course they take advantage of new tools and developments. And one of the approaches actually that we've seen cyber criminals doing that is the approach called data poisoning. So if they actually identify how an algorithm is set up within a business, for example, they can, and I think you touched upon, Suzanne, already on that, they can actually allow malware or scam emails to actually go through. So these will not be detected as malware. And that is something that the example of the employee you mentioned easily could have done. So artificial intelligence can be used by that. But we have also artificial intelligence being used for phishing attacks. So we have new tools. We have, for example, applications for phishing attacks. We have new applications. I will just mention one, Lyrebird, that can mimic your voice. And this way, cyber criminals can actually phrase or actually make a phone call using that application and give orders to your secretary or an employee, pretending to be you. And trust me, that mimic of your voice is really identical. Leading to a potential phishing attack. So of course, criminals are taking advantage of all these tools in their favor. But the challenge is, how do we flip things so that also artificial intelligence is, I don't know, as secure as possible, and devices that we use, IoT devices, are as secure as possible from their development. So we're talking about the users and the responsibility of users, but developers and engineers have responsibility as well. And we talk a lot about security by design nowadays, right? So how do we engrave and build security from the starting point of developing a device? And how can we accomplish that in order to prevent actually all these devices and applications being used against us in the end? Yeah, so these are some of the potential risks that we face and we will be facing. So again, if we are the users of such devices, we ought to be aware of how to ensure they are used in a secure way. And unfortunately, at the moment, we have to do that individually. I think that in the future, some risks will be prevented because security will be actually by design. So, but yeah, nowadays, knowledge and awareness, I think, is necessary in our everyday life. And I think this is how we began this webinar, Suzanne, talking about our everyday life. It can't just be about the work environment. It's what we do, how we act every day online.
That's right. And I think our people, you know, when we were talking about this and talking about dealing with artificial intelligence and the, you know, the voices, it was interesting. This morning I was watching the news and Paul McCartney was on. He was at a concert, and through artificial intelligence and remastering things, they had John Lennon singing with him.
Yes.
So,
yeah.
You know, if you don't know what artificial intelligence is, just look at a movie or watch something like that, and then you can see how it's going to be playing within our everyday lives. And I think that's the problem. A lot of people don't know what artificial intelligence is and what it means and what's going to be coming at us in the future. So it is pretty scary. And when you think about the devices that we have every single day, I know that you know, Apple just said that they're coming out with a whole big, you know, release of all new equipment. Now, Apple's pretty good with their security controls, but you know, when they're trying to just get to market, are we thinking about how are we building in the security from the ground up? And you know, or we certainly don't want to be bolting it on at the end. That's for sure, right?
Well, this hour has flown by, so I'm going to give you the floor for final thoughts. Dr. Beta, we'll start with you. Final thoughts. I know you kind of talked about some of the risks for the future, but your final thoughts on kind of what lies ahead. What should people be doing and paying attention to?
Well, people should be paying attention to their behavior online, but there's no reason for panic. As I said, emotions can actually lead us to panic, and thus lead us to that learned helplessness of doing nothing, reacting to nothing, and not following advice in the end. So I think at an individual level, organizational level, even national level, we need to make sure that we follow an approach of providing advice to people in such a way that makes sense, is simple, is doable, and it's relevant. Because, and I think Suzanne mentioned it, if I talk to an engineer or a cybersecurity expert, I might be using words and basically meanings that mean nothing to an individual, someone who is not an expert. So again, relevant information, targeted information, and continue on the work around providing awareness and education to users. This way, I believe we can make the individual the strong link, not the weak link, and we can prevent risks online.
Suzanne, final thoughts?
I agree. You know, they're just using terminology, right, Maria? I had somebody ask me, one of my older family members, so what does it mean that data is in the cloud? Does it, you mean like that cloud up there? And so, right, we just use terminology and not think about saying, no, it's in somebody else's data center, right? It's just, we come up with terminology, and I don't think that we're as good to define what some of these terms mean, things that, you know, us as security experts, we just take for granted, and we throw around acronyms and words and, you know, I think we have to sometimes step back and get to the basics, so people understand really what we're talking about, and they're not just glazed over. Maybe that would help, you know, make them become better, you know, users of their equipment and keeping them safer, you know, from all aspects, from, you know, being in the workplace to, you know, because somebody in finance might not know what the cloud means either, right? Or, you know, as well as, you know, a parent or a grandparent. So, yeah, I think that we have to, you know, think about speaking in their language sometimes, to get them to fully understand and grasp what the risk is and where the risk is coming from.
Dr. Beta, where can more people find information on you if they want to keep up with you and everything that you're doing? Is there a good website, Twitter handle? Where can they follow you?
Yes, of course, I'm on Twitter, I'm on LinkedIn. They can go on the website of the university I'm affiliated at, Queen Mary University of London, but of course at AwareGo's website, where you can find some actually of the papers and the work we're doing with employees. And of course, a lot of publications you can find on my website. So happy to provide it.
Where can people keep tabs on you, Suzanne?
Same thing, you can do Twitter, LinkedIn. I do most of my postings on LinkedIn, and certainly through Global Learning Systems. And yep, I hope that people really got to take something away from this valuable conversation that we had. And you know, Maria, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure, really.
So I hope that, you know, Brian, from your end, did you learn anything new today, Brian?
I learned a lot from both of you. You know, we definitely have to be vigilant, and, you know, whether it's our parents and grandparents and kids, or whether it's corporate world, you know, you've got to pay attention to this, and can't just be a check the box, right? Like, this needs to be ongoing. And
right, no checking the box.
Yeah,
you do it the right way.
Well, thank you both, Dr. Maria Beta, Suzanne Gorman. This was an insightful conversation. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Brian, for moderating.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.